But as I've said, and as I've hopefully conveyed and portrayed the image and foundation of the concept of what I'm speaking on, and brought you to that whole vibration and that happening, occurring, you have to understand that since this plan has been going on for so many thousands of years, some of it and most of it goes beyond a human level. It goes into the spiritual realm of things. But the aspect and the concept at this point is, in my opinion, more towards the end game of things per se. And it's to say it's to keep us in limbo. It's to keep us in a certain perception, of course, and to create a certain level of stress and limitless amount of non-directives and cultivating empathetic behavior and or Christ consciousness in people, in which they'd rather hurt themselves or hurt themselves for someone else before hurting someone, or just wanting to be able to do away with evil without doing evil. It's more than that at this point, because in order to lock all that in order to set that perception in place to where it becomes permanent over hundreds of years period of time, it would have to keep us in a time frame or a storyline, almost like replaying the same scene over and over, or the same scenes over and over, and never finishing the movie, or constantly reading the same chapters over and over and starting over in the middle of the book, and just never completing it. And it's to, in my opinion, offset things for what can't be prevented later as a result of the power and the indifference of the rules that are set in place in the universe. They're trying to prepare for those things so they can mimic them, diminish their power, and set up countermeasures and things of that nature. But seeing as this is the end game of things, revealing anything at this point is pretty much futile, other than just perhaps maybe giving the peace of mind to someone who has already created the same conclusion, to know that they're not the only person who feels this way. But anyway, they fucking created a timeline within the story, and that's why the mimicry is so incredibly extensive at this point, in my opinion, is because it gives you the viewpoint of the more we change, the more we stay the same in a different light. When you realize that, and I want to say before I go into the specifics of the historical facts, that much of what we call history is much like another element that I mentioned about how they have to reveal the truth to people before someone else does, to diminish the power of the truth being revealed. And that is what many people have noticed, is the term history is his story. So it's almost something to scoff at when it comes to explaining things, because it just supports what I've said as far as we've been tricked into becoming literary property, and no different than the perception that we've all agreed upon and taught each other and supported, which has consequently created the reality that we live in. But according to what you can find, which in my opinion, with the concept of the truth having to be revealed before someone else truly reveals it with most things, just to counter the measures of balances set in place. But it's the reality that's conveyed to us and portrayed within ourselves to the point where it becomes strong enough to be more than difficult to combat. It's an impossibility to change it, in my opinion, because it's all based on the perception that an individual creates as a result of the actions and beliefs of the masses that they encounter, which are very similar everywhere that you or people in your situation are in. And Christ consciousness is a concept, and Jesus Christ is also a concept that is similar in other religious teachings. And I don't care to analyze all of the roots of every religion and how they're similar and all the proof of it and the intention of it. I'm focusing more on the effect of it and how it can be and is used against us in a way. But more importantly, how it supports what we consider to be reality. So therefore, reality just being a word, a term. As I said, term being a building block for the spiritual prison, which is constantly monitoring, manipulating, and eradicating the intellect, emotion, and will of what our religious teachings would support, the word being Christ consciousness. A lot of times you hear terms like order out of chaos, and there's all kind of terms like that in Indian culture and concepts and groups, and you just, as I said, see similarities that support the reality, but you have to account for the way things have been regulated, founded, and implemented have been based upon a manipulation of the benevolence that's more powerful, which consequently leads to a false interpretation of the value of good morals because of the effects it has on the external life over a period of time, which is, in my opinion, the term that best represents the spiritual prison that I speak of. They're trying to eradicate individualism and normalize hive minds on more than just a sci-fi technological fucking level, man. It's a social engineering that's been taking place for a very, very long time and has been put into play over hundreds of years from covert manipulation that was never even really noticed by any opposition until it was entirely too late to stop. We live within a timeline that is published and has literary property. Whether you want to take that literally or not is up to you, but seeing as how our whole language is just making fun of the entire situation, literal being a little jab at the word literature. And as I said, none of it's ever a secret. All of it's all in your face, and it's to offset the reality that's already here, that can't be changed, that you don't get told of or that you get diverted away from. That is the unchangeable and unshakable rules of the universe that I'm never going to attempt to explain or claim that I know or understand. I'm only aware of the concept of evil posing as if its power is as it represents it. It only exists and strengthens its belief in others through manipulation of the power of the benevolence. But seeing as how important perception is, you have to know how important it is to completely understand what creates perception. All the various minute things and a lot of major circumstances and occurrences and scenarios, and how that correlates to what we term reality. And seeing as how the word is law according to the Bible, this spiritual prison is what we call time, and we so blatantly reveal the truth that we never even see how it's revealed covertly, like the word term itself can be applied to time. And so it consequently sees to it to reveal the truth before someone else does. So revealing the truth is not necessarily as effective if it's already been done. As I said, mimicry is done on so many different levels that it spills over into things you wouldn't suspect, because it's all about diminishing power. It's siphoning off the power of people's good intentions. So never get it misconstrued when I speak of Christ consciousness or someone being Christ-like, because I don't care whoever you hear who has half a brain, whether their perception's been warped or not, you know that even if it was able to be done, you never could. You can never fully be him, regardless of how you interpret the Bible or what your beliefs are. But it also subconsciously affects your behavior towards difficulty in remaining empathetic towards humanity in general, and how to not fuel yourself with negative energy from other people. But it creates an environment where you end up having to feed off of the negative energy of yourself, and you just get wrapped up in the same bullshit. It's constantly surprising me how the concept of the occurrences and circumstances being cultivated are taking place, and how they're so simplistic but so hard to explain, or how I'll have paragraphs in my head from day one since I've started doing this, and I can never put what I want to say into words the way I would want to. And I'm constantly having to go back and edit all the silent pauses of me adjusting or alternating my words to convey the same message.
truth always comes to light. And it comes down to like someone or a group of people having the mentality of, I'm my brother's keeper, in a way. And then the people they consider to be that they keep, being that of, I guess since we're speaking spiritually and biblically, Cain. And it's just labels, man. It's really blowing my mind constantly, over and over and over, how it's like this, it's like that, it's like this, and it's also like that, and the way this works is the way that is working, and the stories just go on and on. You also have to think of Kronos and Saturn and all that shit when it comes to time. But when it comes to the truth coming to light, it's the fact that someone being their brother's keeper, for example, that'll come to light. You know, it all comes to light. And Most High doesn't have to intervene, and it won't. And that's what concerns me, is this whole Luciferian agenda that people scoff at, that's clearly in play, and pitting the atheist and the nihilist against all religions, and then against each other, and then resolving their differences with Luciferianism. That's clearly happening. It's not a fictitious story. That is a tactic that is occurring. They're trying to destroy all religions and have a one world government, and then swoop in with Luciferianism or something similar. So you always have to keep that in mind. But the truth always comes to light. The truth, well, since I'm speaking on that one, let's not think anybody's being subliminal here, and I'll say the truth will always be revealed. And it doesn't have to be revealed to the Most High in order for things to regulate themselves and run correctly and eradicate things we actually don't want, instead of just eradicating ourselves because we believe we can't eradicate them things, because everything is set in place to run a certain way, and it is still running that way. It's just we're being manipulated with lack of knowledge of that, and even with a level of knowledge, it's being manipulated to a point where it's having an adverse reaction on the masses if anything remotely comes close to changing it. In other words, it would have to happen very expeditiously, extensively. It would not be able to be stopped, and it would be unexpected. It would not be deceptive. It would just be unstoppable and sudden. But once the truth is revealed, it's like the universe is still running how it's running. We're just out here acting dumb as fuck, and the people who know how it runs is using it against us, kinda, in a way. You know, they create the image to where that's what's happening. So basically that's what does happen. But once the truth is revealed, things will regulate themselves as they're supposed to. And the truth isn't something that's going to be on the news. It's going to be within each person. It's going to be an epiphany. And it's going to have to happen on a large scale. And it's not something that everyone is going to share. It's not going to be one factor that everyone is like, oh, now we all know about this one thing. It's not even anything close like that. It's what some people will call spiritual awakening, for lack of better words. It's more than an epiphany too. It's gonna have to be a shift in the paradigm. It's gonna have to be a realization of the truth in each one of us that is holding us back in this spiritual prison. This spiritual prison that we're in, called time. This time that that's what we call it. That's how we live. That's how we regiment and limit the divine mind. Time. That's it. That's pretty much, in a nutshell, the bars, the walls, the barbed wire, that and fear, and all the negative, stressful connotations and emotions that follow that, due to the events and circumstances that are created. Due to, in my opinion, is a lack of the knowledge we have of the power of our own abilities. I want to expand a little bit on
these thoughts of this term spiritual prison, and how spirit is in the soul, and the soul is comprised of intellect, will, and emotion, and how certain decisions have certain outcomes in regards to social life and status, and how certain mentalities are encouraged and where our values lie. It clearly isn't in benevolence. And I hate to harp so much on these two words, benevolence and malevolence, and good and evil, and because it comes down to so much of a difference of an opinion and all these rules and shit, and I don't know, it's such a thin line when it comes down to certain things with some people's mind states, and it's so controversial, really too deep to even speak on in public, because you just look like a jackass or a moral arbiter, as I've heard some people eloquently use the term. But it's this whole term, man, this spiritual prison, because the intellect, will, and emotion is being targeted within certain people who construct and instruct theirs in a certain way. But with the weaker power being the predominant structure that's controlling humans here and the reality that we perceive, just as a reaction of the systems that are set in place in this universe, the power of benevolence is that much stronger. However, the manipulation has become so clever at this point that it has honed in on that factor and used it to its advantage by siphoning that power due to non-directives and lack of knowledge in the population. And the population continues to grow. And every positive aspect is either infiltrated or copied and then inverted to influence people in a negative way, using the same personality traits and influential behaviors as a benevolent person or group of people. And it's to diminish the power of those individuals. And some of these individuals are not the best people in the world. That's what really blows my mind, is a lot of these people may even be what I or many people would consider evil people. And it's like they still had influential traits and benevolent tendencies that were preyed upon before they became influential. And then that knowledge has spread out to the general public spiritually, and just through books and things and programs and TV. I mean, all the information is just everywhere these days, you know? But I mean, that's also the same concept of the misinformation that follows around all the truth. It's always some bullshit to throw everything off. That's not by chance. But not only is that strength being manipulated and taken advantage of by becoming so strong in the adverse conditions it's been cultivated in, it's still too powerful and becoming more and more powerful to the point where they can siphon it, and it can still do what it wants to do occasionally, and they're struggling. That only lasts so long because evil does run this reality. Its roots are too far into it at this point. But it's not to say that the capability and the power isn't in the benevolence to change all of it. It's just people's fear of what will happen after that, and the chances being so low. But in keeping that ratio where it is so resiliently, it's created a situation where the consciousness has either been here so long that it's became such a formidable power of benevolence that could actually offset the paradigm of the indifference of malevolence, that they have to falsify the ratio. And that's honestly where I believe that the mimicry comes into play. I think that is the larger picture that no one is even aware of. is that instead of creating the ratio genuinely, they have to actually cut that ratio in half and then have a group of people who does every single thing that those groups of people do. Like say there's 50 of them. There has to be 50, basically Judases is what I would say. You know, not really, but it's like kind of like an Agent Smith kind of deal, except they're copying them instead. You know what I mean? It's like since they are not emotionally or spiritually committed to that lifestyle or consciousness or empathic psychology, they literally have to copy that individual. Like say there's 50 individuals and there was at one time supposed to be 100 in order for the ratio to run correctly, and it would just run naturally just because of the persecution, things of that nature, just the integrity of the person and the ignorance of the person with the Christ consciousness would get the job done. But as things have progressed, I feel that they have had to have a imitator for each one of those 50 just so they can physically do what that individual does to diminish their power, because mimicry diminishes power. For all kind of reasons, it diminishes power. So it creates a situation where reality stays the same because the ratio stays the same, but it's running out of fucking go-go juice, man. If they're having to fucking copy the benevolence behavior just to offset its power, because the paradigm that we're in right now, it creates the mentality that benevolence could not rule the world, because malevolence rules the world through manipulation of the benevolent, because it's siphoning off the power of how strong it has become as a result of it being in the minority. It's almost like you're jumping somebody, right? Like their anger and strength would be 20 times stronger than it would ever be fighting one-on-one. But since they're fighting 20 motherfuckers, they can't do anything. But goddamn if they could. If they fucking got up and got on some Popeye shit, they'd knock every one of them to the damn ceiling just because of the adrenaline. It's like if you bang your thumb with a hammer and you push down on a table with your thumb, how bad does that fucking hurt? A hell of a lot worse than when you don't put pressure on it. That's what I'm getting at, man. So it creates this mentality where if good ran the world and evil was in a minority of people, it would have a scary amount of strength. And I think that's why evil runs the world. You know, that's me having an optimistic viewpoint on it. Instead of, you know, sitting around wondering why and coming up with a negative one that makes you somehow think you can change shit. It just comes down to perception at the end of the day, and how events morph history, and viewpoints and religion and all this supports the reality. It's very correlated, man. It really is crazy because it's gotten a technological aspect at this point, seeing as how the mimicry has become so important that it's developed all kind of practices like NLP, which can mimic a psychosis or a successful person. You know, I mean, it's crazy, because then you get the EEG heterodyne and the EEG cloning, and you start seeing the importance of eradicating personalities. It's a regulation thing, man, because if someone becomes something that is unchangeable, someone can become that person now, and then they can't be changed. And that's why mass psychosis is such a threat. Like imagine if I were to be a huge influence on people and everybody took what I said as gospel truth, and I was completely wrong about every fucking thing. How much of a negative effect it would have on everyone. It's like that. That's why they say God works in mysterious ways, I guess. But it's created a mentality to where people are motivated from fear, because it's unknown what would happen if the paradigm shifted, if the ratio was changed, if the truth was revealed. Would it create some sort of paradox where benevolence ran the world and evil had no power at all? In which case this entire reality and planet, it would either evolve or destruct or just simply disappear. I mean, I don't know what the hell would happen. I think people are just that afraid of the unknown, or indoctrinated or motivated or engineered in such a way to where everything stays the same regardless. But I'll tell you what, I wish I would have recorded that first recording, or it didn't get deleted, or whatever happened. Alright, I can tell this is pretty important what I'm speaking on. It rarely happens where I'll record something and then go back to listen to it and it's not there. I probably won't word it nearly as well, but just from my intuition telling me this is pretty important, I'm gonna try again. From what I gather, we're in a spiritual prison that secures the life of a deity. The security of this deity living here is based upon how we perceive, behave, treat one another. It is completely dependent on things running exactly how they run now, as far as what we do. And that deity is Christ consciousness, or Jesus Christ. And in this world that we live in, reality that we all walk around in and perceive to be so, is not under the control of a benevolence. What regulates the functions and the cause and effect and the judgment is something that has a level of indifference that is nothing short of malevolent. At the very least, it's a mechanical thing. It's a machine that has no feelings. And that is what is necessary for things to consistently run one way regardless of the circumstances, and be able to merit the decision of any exception that we couldn't understand. And the way everything is functioning right now is based so heavily upon what we believe and how we perceive things. But in order for everything to run the way it runs, we have to keep continuing to create Christ consciousness in a minority group of people to keep the ratio at a certain set amount. And it's very important because it's more than similar to how a disease spreads rapidly due to the level of low immunity to it, or how a strength can be developed very rapidly in one person if no one else in the population is aware of it or how to develop it. It's not to say that that one person cannot be eradicated by the predominance of the lesser power that regulates what's already occurring, though. Like I said, everything is just a replica of everything else. So in this situation, you have to understand that if you read the Bible, even without symbolism involved, look at where Jesus was as far as population and timeline and society. They were in a monetary-based system. So before anyone gets to arguing about which group of people put them on the cross, let's just look at it like they weren't much different than us as far as them being a monetary-based system, meaning they bartered and traded, but more importantly, taxed the civilians and used money. And I'm not saying none of that's wrong or right. I'm saying there wasn't much difference as far as it being a monetary-based system. That was how the society that Jesus Christ was familiar with in the timeline and the stories that we read. So in order for us to continue to live in the reality that we create, a Christ consciousness has to be created in a minority group. Not a racial minority group. I mean a small amount of people in comparison to the population, and that ratio has to remain the same in order to repeat history, because it was at one time that entire population in that timeline putting one man on the cross. Now you have a consciousness that has to be created, because that was part of that story that created that reality, and we have to mimic what happened. So what happened does not take over and actually change the paradigm as perhaps was intended, because the best way to take the power away from something covertly is to mimic it. So we've created this situation where Christ is now a consciousness that has to be cultivated in a smaller group of the population. So we continue to persecute them in order to have a monetary-based system and live as those people that had that monetary-based system, culturally, philosophically, ambitiously, and innovatively. So it creates a situation where you have like 100 Jesuses, 100 Judases, all these different people in the past that made these changes that warped everyone's perception into what we have now, and made all the events happen in a certain way to set the social settings up the way they are. All these iconic people, all these mass murderers, we are quite literally creating these people in large groups that are just small enough to be considered a minority in comparison to the population, just so we can continue to be able to keep the same secrets and move in the same direction. And it creates a situation where just as a disease or a strength can progress or spread rapidly due to lack of immunity or lack of knowledge in one person, this Christ consciousness, being a small amount, has enough power to offset things in a way to basically save the world in a way. But really, it's to secure the way things are. Damn, I wish I would have got that other recording. I worded it way better.